Ah! Someone shouted in the darkness. It's a loud cry, it's a terrible cry, and in this scream, there was a thumping sound from the Audiobook in the room. Noisy voices followed. What's the matter? I heard someone calling. Didn't the Japanese come to kick the camp? The latter sentence is the key point, just this sentence made everyone in the room excited. Turn on the light. Someone yelled in the darkness, it was their platoon leader, Old Hat Wang. With a bang, the lights in the room came on. Although the wattage of the light bulb is not large, it is still an incandescent lamp. At that time, the room became brighter, and under the light were the soldiers of the Northeast Army panicked. It's no wonder they are the garrison of Fengtian North Camp. For some time now, the Japanese soldiers outside the city have been staring at the city, and now someone yelled as soon as they fell asleep, and then someone yelled, "Aren't the Japanese soldiers here to kick the camp?" Who would it be? Don't worry. You must know that they don't even have a gun in their hands now. How could a soldier not have a gun? The reason is that there is an order no resistance, and the guns are locked in the warehouse. When everyone was still in shock, they looked at each other under the light, but at this time they realized that the doors and windows were intact, and there were no Japanese soldiers kicking the camp. Who the just now? The platoon leader, Old Mao Wang, was furious. It was like a ghost screaming in the middle of the night. It was frightening, frightening to death. I heard the voice of the new Morganer. He called. At this time, a soldier pointed to a very thin companion and said, "Everyone has sat up, and of course that stick is also sitting." At this time, everyone saw that the soldier called Morganer was sitting there with dripping sweat dripping from his head. I also heard the sound of Morganer, no mistake. I was just about to fall asleep. Another soldier testified. Northeast people are used to sleeping on kings, and so are soldiers. The so-called Audiobook refers to a row of big kings, and the entire row of 30 or so people all fell asleep on this kong. Shang Zhen, were you the one who yelled that just now? At this moment, an old soldier had already got off the ground and stood in front of the stick. I, third brother, I'm having a nightmare. The numb boy said in a low voice consciously. As soon as he said these words, there was a sound of fuck in this row of rooms. Shang Zhen is his name, and Morganer is his nickname. Morganer's nickname is such an image, he is a newcomer, and no one in this row will remember his name. He was brought into the army by Li Fushun, whom he called the third elder brother, the day before yesterday. Li Fushun was a veteran in the second company, he was also a squad leader, and he was also the brother and sister of their company commander Hu Biao. To put it bluntly, the people he led were actually going to the Northeast Army to make a living, and the company commander Hu Biao naturally wanted to give him this face. It's just that when Hu Biao looked at Shang Zhen's thin and lonely appearance like a compasses, he couldn't help but say strange things. His original words are as follows: if you talk about a big man in the Northeast, then you are not a big man in the Northeast. You must be a poor man or a man. You are so good, you are just a man in the Northeast. So Shang Zhen got the nickname Morganer. Zhu Kaishan, Ho Kanshan, you two shut up your idiot mouth. Old Mao Wang scolded. With the order of the platoon leader, 2 soldiers rushed forward among the soldiers who had made a false alarm, and directly pressed Shang Zhen on the big plank bunk. Those 2 soldiers were exactly one named Zhu Kaishan and the other named Ho Kanshan. It's just a coincidence that both of their names have the word mountain. And a pig and a monkey are the second General Hung Ha under the platoon leader Wang Lao Mao. For a skinny guy like Shang Zhen, there is really no need for soldiers to swarm up. Here are socks. A soldier next to him reached out and touched a pair of socks and handed them over. That's my sock. A soldier nicknamed Lu Dejiao quit. What kind of socks are you wearing with those stinky feet? If you can get rid of the socks, we'll be relieved, said Ho Wangshan, who was stuffing socks into Shang Zhen's mouth. Lu Dezuo's feet are not usually smelly, but his sweaty feet are 10 miles away from the wind. Once when they even took the train, Lu Dazuo took off his shoes. At that time, there was an indescribable smell in the whole carriage. If they were ordinary passengers, they could of course hide, but they were the army, so how could others leave as soon as they said they wanted to? Although Wang Laomao let Lu Dazu put on the shoes in time, the smell was unbearable. So much so that the people they lined up later compiled a set called 3 Flavors in the World for Lu Dazuo. These 3 flavors are respectively, the foxhole on the mountain, the feet of Lu Dazuo, and the Geijihu nest, armpit, of Lao Mazi. There is always a foxy smell of the fox itself in the foxhole. The old Mazi said that the Russians in the north have body odor, which smells stinky, just like the smell in the sheep pen. And Lu Dajiao's foot odor can overcome the mutton on Lao Mazi's body, second only to the foul smell of the fox cave, so the smell can be seen. In the commotion, Shang Zhen desperately turned his head and shut up, holding his breath, trying to avoid the smelly socks. But his nickname is Ma Ganner, even one soldier can hold him down, let alone 2. Zhu Kaishan put him on the bunk with great strength, and Ho Wangshan pinched his nose. No matter how stupid Shang Zhen was at this time, he could still figure it out. When someone pinched his nose, he was letting himself open his mouth to breathe, but how could he open his mouth? Oh, Xiao Mian, you can really stand up. Ho Wangshan laughed. But no one wants this kind of praise. After a while, Shang Zhen, who couldn't breathe, had to subconsciously open his mouth, and at this moment, the pair of smelly socks were stuffed into his mouth. Shang Zhen could only woo-woo and struggle desperately. It's just that his thin and slender appearance is like a snake that has been grabbed 7 inches and pressed to the plank, so where is there room for him to resist? Well, this time, his mouth was gagged, and he couldn't vomit even if he wanted to. This time, without waiting for the platoon leader Wang Laomao to give an order, a soldier next to him brought a rope and tied Shang Zhen up. How can you not tie up your hands if your mouth is gagged? If it wasn't tied, Shang Zhen would definitely take out the socks by himself. When all the work was done, the whole room finally became quiet, only Shang Zhen who was occasionally let out a woo. Li Fushun looked at Shang Zhen's pitiful appearance of being into rice dumplings, and sighed helplessly, but he was the platoon leader Wang Mao who didn't even look at him. He and Wang Laomao are also old friends, and they also crawled out of the same trench, so he naturally knows what kind of virtue Wang Laomao is. In fact, this is no wonder Wang Laomao. They are a military camp here. Recently, the Japanese soldiers outside Fengtian city have been ready to move. Although there is an order not to resist, who knows when the Japanese soldiers will rush in, so what if there is a battle? It wasn't once or twice that Japanese soldiers killed civilians in the 3 eastern provinces. Yu reading www.yuyugonshu.com just put up with it. But as soldiers, which one of them is not vigilant? This time it was good. The Japanese soldiers didn't come in, but when everyone was sleepy, Shang Zhen suddenly yelled, "Do you want to scare Yin or not?" This is also thanks to the fact that the guns are locked in the armory. If they had guns by their side, there was no guarantee that someone would reach for the gun and fire it. Can Shang Zhen take this responsibility? Besides, since he came to serve as a soldier, his body is of course not that expensive, and he will always suffer what he deserves, and he, the third brother, has nothing to do. Sleep. Old Mao said angrily, and just before the soldier turned off the lights, he still glanced at Li Fushun and complained, "Why did you get such a puppet to serve as a soldier?" Li Fushun glanced at old Mao Wang and didn't answer. Company Commander Hu Biao knew the reason why he brought Shang Zhen over to serve as a soldier, as did platoon leader Wang Laomao. Because Li Fushun's parents died when he was very young. His parents died and his family was very poor. He was taken care of by Shang Zhen's parents since he was a child. The so-called kindness received by others should be repaid by the spring, not to mention that Shang Zhen's parents have the kindness to rebuild him. Now Shang Zhen's father is also dead, and Shang Zhen's mother has only one breath left. His mother entrusted her son to him. Do you think he can ignore it? The snoring of soldiers resounded in the room again. After a tiring day, everyone quickly fell asleep again. It's just that in the darkness, only Shang Zhen, known as Ma Ganner, stared at the dark ceiling with wide-eyed eyes. He was enjoying the smell of those smelly socks, but he didn't know what he was thinking. September 17, 20, was an ordinary day for the Northeast Army of Fengtian North Camp. Even though the guns are locked in the warehouse, the military is always going to fuck. The sound of soldiers shouting and running and officers lecturing were constantly heard on the playground. The morning passed quickly. After eating at noon, everyone went back to the barracks to rest. At this time, the people in the second row were laughing at the Kong head next to the door of the Datong shop. The person they were looking at was of course Shang Zhen, and now Shang Zhen had become the laughing point of all of them. Although under the strict order of the platoon leader Wang Lao Mao, Lu Dezuo was sitting with his shoes on, but many people still smelled the indistinct smell of drunkenness in the air. With such a smell, it was hard for them to imagine what it would be like for Shang Zhen to be stuffed with that sock last night. "Don't look thin, but you have a good appetite," said a soldier who was walking in, looking at Shang Zhen who was sitting cross-legged on the Kong. Shang Zhen looked up at him with a bitter face and said nothing. He's a rookie, he has no desire to talk to veterans. Because his third brother Li Fushun had already enlightened him. If you want to eat this meal honestly, you must be obedient. You just had a stinky sock stuffed into your mouth by them, and you didn't suffer any physical injuries, so you have to bear it. The soldier who had just entered the room in front of him laughed at Shang Zhen, which was implying how stinky Lu Dezu's stinky socks were. And not only did you not spit it out, but you also ate so much at noon today. Seeing Shang Zhen staring at him but not speaking, the soldier felt ashamed and said angrily, "Look at your cowardice, see, your face is twitching like a shoehorn, who are you giving embarrassment to?" The soldier trembled when he said Shang Zhen. But just when the soldier was about to show off his prestige and wanted to grab Shang Zhen's ear, his ear was already grabbed by someone else's big hand. "Get out of here! Are you playing tricks on my brother?" A voice rang in the soldier's ear. It was Li Fushun who had returned. Li Fushun is a veteran and a squad leader. When he was sleeping last night, it was Wang Lao Mao, the platoon leader, who was talking about rectifying Shang Zhen, so he didn't say a word. But he can save face for Mr. Wang, and who is this soldier? The soldier naturally knew about Li Fushun's relationship with Shang Zhen, and he was annoyed when he turned around and saw that it was Li Fushun, and hurriedly followed Li Fushun's words and said okay. Li Fushun let go, and the soldier covered his ears and went into the house in a despondent manner. "Xiao'er, what did you dream about last night?" Li Fushun sat cross-legged on the Kong and asked Shang Zhen. Seeing Li Fushun's concerned expression, Shang Zhen felt safe and replied in a low voice, "Gun." "Oh!" Li Fushun suddenly realized. This was Shang Zhen's third day in the barracks. On his first day in the barracks, before all of them had their guns taken away, one soldier went off while fiddling with it. Fortunately, no one was injured when the gun went off. Unfortunately, the head of the German blackback being led was pierced by the bullet, and then the bullet pierced a copper-colored bugle worn by a bugler around his waist. That black-backed dog was their leader's favorite and the only dog in their station. The bullet almost hurt someone. The leader was so angry that he personally stepped forward and gave the soldier who escaped the fire a big slap on the ear, and then shut him down. Confinement. And when the gun went off, Shang Zhen happened to be next to the blackback. Li Fushun was there at the time, and saw Shang Zhen tremble for a while, wondering if Shang Zhen was frightened by the shot. "I remember you weren't so timid," Li Fushun said. It's just that Shang Zhen wasn't answering the call, as if he was recalling the power of that shot. Li Fushun joined the army when he was 15 years old. Shang Zhen's family is two brothers, and Li Fushun was picked up by Shang Zhen's parents as a righteous brother. There is a 2-year age difference between the three, but Li Fushun is the oldest. Li Fushun remembered that when he left home, Shang Zhen was still a naughty boy. He went up trees to touch birds, went down rivers to catch fish, and there was no time for rest. Li Fushun is 22 this year, and Shang Zhen is 18. It was only when Li Fushun returned to his home in the suburbs of Fengtian a few days ago that his mother, Shang Zhen's own mother, told him to take Xiao Er away, so he brought Shang Zhen out to serve as a soldier. Li Fushun has been serving as a soldier outside these years, and his impression of Shang Zhen is only that of Shang Zhen when he was a teenager. But how could he have thought that Shang Zhen's courage would become so small? Now he regretted bringing Shang Zhen out. If Shang Zhen made some mistakes because of his timidity, how could he be worthy of his mother? As for how to explain to my mother, I don't need to say any more, because my mother is already seriously ill, and it would be good if I can survive this winter. Shang Zhen's eldest brother has already married, and without his father and mother, Shang Zhen has nothing to rely on, which is why his mother asked him to bring Shang Zhen out. Li Fushun's idea is undoubtedly good, but seeing Shang Zhen's timid and fearful appearance now, he can only shake his head helplessly. Li Fushun lay down on the kong. He was going to rest for a while. At this time, Shang Zhen, who was called a stick by everyone and looked down upon, reappeared in the mind of the German black shell that was beaten to death. At the bang of the gunshot, he saw a hole in the head of the big wolfhound, and then white brains and red blood splashed out. And it was this scene that made Shang Zhen's head hum at that time. At that moment, he seemed to see several people in ancient costumes falling down one after another in front of him. Blood spattered from the backs of those people, and he saw them twitching under his feet. At this moment, he felt as if his heart had been stabbed severely by a sharp needle. He felt the heart-wrenching pain and the inescapable fear of firearms. Shang Zhen is already 18 years old this year, so of course he is not young. He has already married a wife and had children at the age of 18. Just as Li Fushun thought, he was not timid since childhood. But at the age of 17, he felt that his mind had become a field of crops. Why do you say that? Because he found that there were seeds sprouting in his mind. He always dreams about dead people. Reading www.uuganshu. The dead people wearing ancient clothes felt the pain from the bottom of their bones at the same time. Some inexplicable ancient nouns often pop up in his mind. For example, when he sees matches, he thinks of Huazhangzi. When he sees a compound, he thinks of mansions. And that's all, and from time to time, some strange words will come out of his mind. Sometimes when he said it carelessly, his mother and his elder brother would look at it with astonishing eyes, as if he was speaking from another world. He couldn't sleep well at night, and the dream was mixed with reality again, so that his thinking became confused. A person whose thinking is a little confused and has become timid naturally can't think of a clue. Soon after the lunch break, the afternoon training began, and the afternoon training also passed, and it was dark again in a blink of an eye. When the light of the electric lights illuminated the barracks again, Wang Lao Mao, the platoon leader of the 2nd Company and 2nd Row, looked at Shang Zhen again with malicious intentions. "I promise not to shout tonight," Shang Zhen said timidly. Shang Zhen has become timid and fearful now, but that doesn't mean he is stupid. The pair of smelly socks last night really made him unforgettable. So at this time, he who was eager to express his opinion directly took out a cloth note under the eyes of everyone. Shang Zhen's behavior was so strange that everyone looked at him from malicious to curious. What is this kid going to do? And the answer appeared immediately, because Shang Zhen consciously strangled the cloth strip around his mouth and tied it on the back. With the sound of coax, the whole room burst into laughter. "Okay. The kid has a little bit of eyesight." Old Mao Wang laughed loudly, and then shouted loudly, "Turn off the lights." With a snap, the light went out, and the room became quiet. The platoon leader, Old Mao Wang, should not have slept on the top of the kong. All of them in a platoon sleep on the datong bunk. It stands to reason that the platoon leader, Old Mao Wang, should sleep in the best position on the Kong. Which is the best location for a Kong? Of course it is the Kong head. It's like when the northeast people come to the house, guests, when the weather is cold. That family has always greeted like this, come and sit on the Kong head, it's hot. Look at someone who greets guests and says, come on, sit on the top of the Kong. Isn't that the way of hospitality? There is no such thing as hospitality. If people want to recover from fatigue, they have to sleep on a hard Kong. A large Kong was heated by the fire, and the top of the Kong was naturally boiling hot. At this time, when you burn your waist, you will feel extraordinarily ironed. But why did Wang Lao Mao, the leader of the row, take the initiative to give the Kong head to Shang Zhen, a recruit? That is because the Japanese army has been eyeing around Feng Tian. The so-called modern China is a history of humiliation, blood, and tears. It would be fine if China was defeated in the Sino-Japanese War of 1898–1895, but the Russo-Japanese War was fought in northeast China, and the Qing dynasty declared neutrality at that time. In order to compete for your family's land, two enemies went to fight on your family's land, but your family declared neutral, saying that this matter has nothing to do with me. With this behavior, it is no longer a deception, but a useless person who went to grandma's house. Since then, the Japanese have started to operate their own forces in the northeast. At this time, a character named Zhang Ziulan appeared in the northeast. If Zhang Ziulan didn't know a lot of Chinese characters, he had cultivated land, worked as a peddler, and later became a bandit. It's all right to be a bandit, but he just became the biggest bandit leader, and finally became the king of the Northeast in a grandiose manner. According to the words of later generations, this is definitely a model of grassroots counterattack, but it is definitely a hero born out of recklessness. Zhang Ziulan became the king of the Northeast, and he relied on the strength of the Japanese, but he refused to fully obey the Japanese. Naturally, there was both cooperation and struggle. He didn't know that the Japanese already had a plan to completely occupy northeast China and become a second Japan. As a result, he became a thorn in the side and a thorn in the flesh of the Japanese. Just a few years ago, in the 17th year of the Republic of China, the train on which Zhang Ziulan, already known as the Old Man, was bombed by the Japanese when passing Huanggu Tun. Zhang Ziulan, who was seriously injured, was pulled back to the mansion and died soon after, so his position was passed on to his son, the young marshal. The young marshal, who had a family feud, directly accepted the leadership of the Republic of China government, and replaced the flags of the three eastern provinces with blue sky, white sun, and red everywhere. At least in name, the three northeastern provinces have returned to the embrace of China. It's just that since the Japanese have already made a national policy of annexing the three eastern provinces, how can they let it go? As a result, the Japanese began to provoke while increasing their garrisons in the three eastern provinces. Recently, Fengtian City has become more and more popular. The young Marshal Zhang would never surrender to Japan, but he also felt that he could not deal with the Japanese, so his countermeasure was one-word tolerance. Since the Manchu Qing government, China has been weak and weak. Although there are people with lofty ideals who say to drive out foreign aggression and restore China, it is not a day's cold to freeze 3 feet, and the arrogance of the invaders is somewhat numb from top to bottom. It's just that, as the ancients said, prosperity makes the people suffer, death makes the people suffer. If the top management decides to put up with it, the people below will suffer. In the three northeastern provinces, the Japanese army killed a few people today, dozens more tomorrow, and hundreds more the day after tomorrow. Whoever's family is dead and whoever's family is sad, the common people below feel the pain of the skin. At this time, it is time to mention the old Hat Wang, the platoon leader of the 2nd Company and 2nd Platoon of the 2nd Regiment of a certain brigade of the Northeast Army. Small people also have great wisdom. Old Mao Wang muttered inwardly. Tolerating everything is not a good thing. The Japanese are still too aggressive, so there is no guarantee that something big will happen someday. But the problem is that the order given above is that if the Japanese army invades, no resistance is allowed. Northeast people have a bad temper. Even though the Northeast Army is also an army, when people are pointing at you with bayonets, they say that you will not let you resist. How is this possible? So the above gave another order, that is, put all the knives and guns into storage. Just today during the daytime exercise, the company commander Hu Biao once again emphasized the order above, that is, no resistance. Wang Lao Mao is actually a bandit, and he takes his own life very seriously. It's not that he's afraid of death, but even if he dies, he has to fight to the death instead of being stabbed to death. But the gun was taken away, and there was nothing he could do. It was precisely because of this level of consideration that he took the initiative to give up the top of the Kong to Shang Zhen, a new recruit, while he squinted to the top of the Kong himself. In Wang Lao Mao's subconscious mind, if the Japanese army rushed into the barracks, then whoever's Kong head would be unlucky. How about saying that people are selfish? Even Shang Zhen's third brother, Li Fushun, didn't think that Wang Lao Mao was playing with this kind of mind, let alone Shang Zhen, a newcomer. At this time, Shang Zhen was staring at the dark ceiling with a cloth strip tied around his mouth. He couldn't figure out why his current self became so timid. It turns out that I am not such an ant. Just when I set off firecrackers during the Chinese New Year the year before last, I still dared to hold the 2 kicks with my hands and set them off. The second kick is like this: first it jumps into the air with a boom, and then explodes a second time when it is in the air, and it is another boom. It is precisely because the second kick kicked out of the hand at the first sound, as long as it is not crushed to death, it will never explode in the hand. But just last year, when he set off firecrackers again, he was terrified. But this time he followed his third brother Li Fushun to join the Northeast Army as a soldier. As soon as he saw the moment when the bullet shot through the big German wolfhound, he felt an innate fear. He didn't even dare to tell Li Fushun that his legs were already shaking like chaff. Could it be that he was dizzy? No, Shang Zhen immediately denied his idea. He had already experimented at home. He had seen a person fainting in blood before, and that was Wu's second child in their village. The second child Wu has a big shoulder and round waist, and he is usually awesome. But one time when the second child Wu saw blood, his claws became numb at that time, so he went straight into the arms of his daughter-in-law who was a head shorter than him. Just imagine, a man as strong as a bear goes into the arms of a little white rabbit. What a ridiculous scene it is. But no matter how funny it is, that's Wu's second child's business. Even after he became timid, he didn't feel dizzy. Shang Zhen couldn't figure it out. And what changed just last year was not just that he became less courageous, he suddenly found that he became edible. My own appetite can catch up to 2 or 3 times the original. Since his father passed away, he and his mother depended on each other for life. The eldest brother has already married, and there are 3 children in the family now, so he can't count on others to help. But he didn't learn his father's carpentry skills. In this way, it became a problem for him to eat with his old mother. In the end, it was his elder brother who said, "Come on, the second child, you go to join the army with third brother Li, and I will take care of the old lady after you." Reading www.yuyugonshu.com is finished. I can afford to feed my old lady, but I can't afford you, a big belly, man. So that's how he became a soldier. But now his courage has become so timid. If it wasn't for the support of the third brother here, wouldn't he let others drive him back? Thinking about it is a worrying thing. Thinking of this, Shang Zhen couldn't help but let out a woo. Why did he say woo? That was what he wanted to sigh. But when he sighed, he forgot that his mouth had already been strangled by himself with a cloth strip, so how could he still sigh? He can only woo. He didn't sleep well last night. Then no one can sleep well. He was stuffed with 2 filthy, stinky torn socks last night, and now thinking about it, he still leaves fragrance on his lips and teeth. Forget it, let's sleep. Feeling drowsy, Shang Zhen became confused, but during this half-dream and half-awake period, 2 words popped out of his mind suddenly, and those 2 words were stunned. Thinking of these 2 words, Shang Zhen suddenly became agitated. I wouldn't be dizzy, would I? Since I am dizzy, what kind of soldier should I be? Shang Zhen was actually very sleepy, but his mind was already thinking about it. He remembered that he saw a soldier from the Northeast Army pass by his house with a gun on his back last year, and he felt his legs go weak at that time. And this time when the big wolfhound was directly penetrated by the bullet, it seemed that his eyes were staring straight at the rifle in the hand of the soldier who went off fire. Just when Shang Zhen was somewhat sure that he was fainted, he suddenly heard a scream of "Ah" coming from outside the house. Then there was the sound of running and chopping. "Ma Ganner, what the are you screaming again?" Someone in the room scolded. It was old Mao Wang who spoke again. After all, the old soldier was highly vigilant, and he woke up whenever there was any movement. "Turn on the light. Tie up the hands of this dog." This was Ho Kanshan, one of Wang Lao Mao's 2 humming generals, speaking. Yes, at this moment, Li Fushun suddenly shouted in a low voice, "Stop talking. Listen again." Li Fushun, a veteran, also woke up. To say that Wang Lao Mao and Li Fushun are not so vigilant, not only because they are veterans, but also because they followed the old commander Zhang Ziulin before they became soldiers. At that time, they were bandits. A group of people who robbed their homes, and those who were missed by other people who robbed their homes. How could their vigilance not be high? It was already ingrained in their bones. When Li Fushun yelled, the room fell silent at that moment. At this time, the people in the room realized that something was wrong. The sound they heard was not from inside the room at all, but it was all from outside. At this time, the platoon leader Wang Lao Mao also reacted. "Don't turn on the lights." The voice of Xi Suo came from Wang Lao Mao, and it was Wang Lao Mao who jumped to the ground with his bare feet. Then others saw Mr. Wang's figure appearing in front of the window. They are the Northeast Army, a regular army, and their brigade is still an elite unit of the Northeast Army. So their treatment is also good, but there is a window in their bungalow, but it is glass. There are big lights outside the barracks, which stay on all night. It's just that the headlight closest to their barracks can't shine directly here, but how can the outside light not shine into the room through the glass windows? Old Mao Wang lay on the window with his pouted and looked out. At this time, the outside of the room was full of people's voices, and Wang Lao Mao saw someone running under the dim light. Immediately afterwards, he saw the lights of several houses turned on, and in an instant, the entire camp area became brighter. They are here in Fengtian City. It can be said that the industrial level of Fengtian City in the whole of China is very few. They have planes, cannons, tanks, and arsenals here, so how could they not have power plants? But at this moment, old Mao Wang saw behind the running soldier, a short soldier with a bayonet-mounted rifle suddenly appeared. Looking at those soldiers with bayonet-mounted rifles, Wang Lao Mao was taken aback for a moment. In the Northeast dialect, those soldiers are all small and short, and their height is less than 1.6 meters, but some of their hats have fart curtains, and some wear steel helmets. Damn! Old Mao Wang and the people who squeezed beside him to observe the situation outside uttered foul words at the same time, and it was Li Fushun who also squeezed over. "The Japanese soldiers have entered the barracks, everyone put on your shoes quickly." Wang Lao Mao restrained his heartbeat and ordered. With his sound, their room was also in chaos, and it was also a crackling sound. It's just that no matter how loud the sound in their room was, it was not as loud as the sound outside the house, because it was they who heard a faint bang from outside the house. The sound was not small, and they felt as if the ground was trembling. In this way, the soldiers who were anxious to find shoes became even more confused. Although there were bright lights, not everyone could find shoes. At this time, Old Mao Wang and Li Fushan, who were lying on the window, trembled from the sound just now. They are veterans, of course they know that the faint sound just now was obviously a cannon. It's just that the cannon shot didn't hit their camp, it probably hit the camp of other troops. It's time to fire the cannon. Old Mao Wang muttered softly. He and Li Fushan exchanged glances, but when they both turned their heads back to look outside, their eyes widened at the same time. Under the light, they saw that the bayonets of the Japanese army had pierced the backs of their companions. The Japanese soldiers started killing people. Old Mao Wang and Li Fushan couldn't help but exchanged glances. The state of mind of the two of them at this time is the same. When they saw the Japanese killing people, they were angry at first, but then they became worried about themselves. They didn't have a gun in a whole platoon. If the Japanese soldiers rushed into their house, how would they respond? Are you waiting for someone to kill you? Under the brighter and brighter light, Wang Lao Mao and Li Fushan both saw it, and each other's eyes were shining. But their eyes are not seeing any gold and silver treasures, but they are full of anxiety, and there are countless what to do written in those eyes. As soldiers at the bottom, they did not expect that the Japanese army would do it as soon as they said it. What do they have? This is just a military camp, not to mention axes, sickles, and picks, but they don't even have a rolling pin. But at this moment, a low voice came from the door of the house. The voice was not loud, it sounded a little timid, and only said 2 words, but old Mao Wang and Li Fushan heard it. That was Shang Zhen's voice, and what Shang Zhen said was baking Kong. Yes indeed. It's true that they don't have weapons at hand, but they can pick up the Kong. Once the Kong is removed, there will be bricks. With a brick, at least one guy can take a picture of the Japanese soldiers' forehead, and then they can rush out to the armory to get their guns. Don't make a sound, take out the Kong quickly, everyone must hold at least 1 brick. Old Mao Wang ordered. Now everyone in their platoon has figured out what's going on outside. Yu reading www.yuyugonshu.com. Everyone got busy. They didn't expect that Shang Zhen, a cowardly person, would have such a good idea. It's just that now is not the time to praise Shang Zhen. Anyone who has done masonry work knows that it is only the first brick that is difficult to remove from the wall, because there is a lot of mud that has been baked and dried on it. Once the first brick is removed, the rest of the work just do it. Although they had no rifles or rolling pins, they did have a few daggers. Soon there was choking dust in this dimly lit room, which was naturally caused by the brick removal. Their platoon's preparations were done in such a timely manner that there were already screams and curses outside, and it was unknown how many officers and soldiers of the Northeast Army who were supposed to go to the battlefield to kill the enemy were killed by the Japanese army because they had no weapons in their hands. Don't pile them all together, just a few people behind a window, and a few behind the door. I order everyone to rush out together. Let's go directly to the gun store. Old Mao Wang ordered again. As soon as Wang Lao Mao gave this order, Li Fushan shouted in a low voice, "Everyone is ready, the Japanese soldiers are coming. A dozen or so have come, and 1 of the 2 bricks in their hands will be left." It had been a while since the Japanese soldiers had appeared in the barracks, but Wang Lao Mao and the others hadn't turned on the lights as soon as they saw the opportunity. In this way, they could see the situation outside clearly, but the Japanese soldiers would only go to places with bright lights. As a result, those barracks with lights turned on were unlucky. It's just that at this time the entire camp did not know how many Japanese soldiers rushed in. They were already chasing the unarmed Northeast Army officers and soldiers and ran like wild horses. After all, some Japanese soldiers discovered the abnormality of Wang Lao Mao's platoon. Old Mao Wang and the others couldn't figure out what was going on, why the Japanese army didn't shoot. Perhaps in the eyes of the Japanese army with the spirit of Bushido, since they are facing unarmed Chinese soldiers and they are good at hand-to-hand combat, they can naturally save a bullet. The Northeast Army stationed in the Fengtian North Camp was ordered not to resist, but in fact the Japanese army rushed into the North Camp, and there was really no organized resistance. Although there were also officers and soldiers of the Northeast Army who were unwilling to lead their necks and rose up to resist, what if they didn't have weapons in their hands? The current Japanese Guandong Army is originally an elite unit in the Japanese Army. Their bayonet fighting level is already higher than that of the Northeast Army, not to mention that the Northeast Army has no weapons in their hands now. The Japanese Army, like Ma Tingpingchuan, was already readied at this time, but they really didn't expect that there would be a platoon of Northeast Army waiting for them to kick the battalion. Just when these Japanese soldiers rushed out of the window of Wang Lao Mao's barracks, Wang Lao Mao yelled fight, and the 3 windows in front of their room were kicked out, and what followed was a rain of bricks. How could these Japanese soldiers expect to encounter resistance here? It is basically impossible to directly smash people to death with bricks, but a piece of bricks flying randomly caught the Japanese army off guard. Some Japanese soldiers threw their guns while covering their faces, some sat on the ground after being hit by a brick, and some rolled on the ground after being hit. At this time, old Mao Wang led the people in their row and rushed out from the exit of this room, 3 windows and 1 door. A group of people Holala ran out and directly collided with the smashed Japanese army. It's just that those Japanese soldiers had already been shaved by bricks, but they couldn't care less about using guns for a while, and a few Japanese soldiers who were lying on the ground were stepped on. Then old Mao Wang and the others rushed over, and one of the soldiers even picked up a Japanese rifle by the way. It's just that they were fighting lively here, which attracted the attention of the surrounding Japanese soldiers at that time, and some Japanese soldiers rushed forward with their shining bayonets. The soldier who picked up the Japanese rifle in Mr. Wang's platoon was also bloody. What if he didn't have blood? Why did he pick up a rifle while everyone else was running to the armory? Seeing that his brothers were unarmed, without even thinking about it, he also raised his bayonet and greeted the Japanese army. A lone bayonet faced a row of bayonets, but this was the first time that the Japanese army encountered so far tonight when soldiers of the Northeast Army raised their swords at each other. Courage is commendable, but courage cannot kill the enemy. The soldier of the Northeast Army thrust forward with a lunge, and the Japanese bayonet also came to block him. When the 2 shots collided, the rifle in the soldier's hand failed to stab the Japanese army on the opposite side. When he drew back his rifle and was about to stab again, 2 other Japanese soldiers stabbed forward violently. Because he rushed too fast, his moves were too old to avoid, and the 2 bayonets pierced into his ribs. "Run!" The soldier of the Northeast Army just yelled and fell down. At this time, another piece of brick flew from behind him and hit the Japanese soldier opposite him. It was Wang Lao Mao and the others, knowing that rescue was too late. They had no choice but to turn around and throw all the remaining bricks out of their hands. It's just that no matter how many bricks they throw out, so what? To be a soldier is to use a gun to fight a war. A gun can kill people, but brick can only get his nose bruised and his face swollen. Even if the bridge of his nose is broken, so what? There is undoubtedly a certain irony in having a gun but not being able to use it but having to use bricks. After a rain of bricks, the Japanese army was beaten up and down again, while old Mao Wang and the others turned around and ran away. When Mr. Wang took them to the gun storehouse, there was already a crowd of people, that is, people from the other company ran over to get their guns, but the strange thing was that although there were many people, there was no sound. Different battalions have different camp areas. Their battalion's armory is here. When their guns were collected into the armory, they were stored here. The higher-ups were also worried that the people below would not be able to control themselves, and they would fire their guns when they were bullied by the Japanese army. If they kept the guns in the company, it would be better not to keep them. Although the lower-level officers and soldiers knew to obey orders, when the Japanese army stabbed their bayonets in front of them, it was impossible not to resist with guns. The Japanese army did not shoot when they rushed in. Since they used bayonets, most of the officers and soldiers who woke up from their sleep still ran away. They are the army, so naturally they will not rush into Fengtian City like civilians. They need to get weapons to fight against the Japanese army. Why don't you shoot? Are you going to let the Japanese kill us all? Zhu Kaishan, who had just rushed over, said loudly. It was only after he finished his sentence that old Mao Wang stretched out his hand and grabbed him. Furious, Zhu Kaishan raised his toes and looked forward, only then did he realize that there were 4 people standing at the door of the armory. Those 4 were all officers, and he knew them all. It was their battalion commander Zhang Lianjia and the 3 company commanders below, including their company commander Hu Baiao. The officers are all there, but where can he, an ordinary soldier, speak? Although Zhu Kaishan was angry because the people in his platoon were killed by the Japanese army, he also knew that he could not speak at this time. The whole scene fell silent again. Elder Wang glanced around stealthily, and then he saw Luzyan, another platoon leader of his company. Old Mao Wang was short and leaned over gently. There was no need for him to ask about this situation. Luzyan whispered to him, "The higher-ups won't let you shoot, and the battalion commander will also have a headache." One sentence explains why this is the case now. The order not to fire the guns was not issued by the battalion commander, and it could not be issued by the regimental commander or brigade commander. It had to be the meaning of the above. Could it be that the battalion commander didn't want to shoot and watch his brother be killed by the Japanese army? That is impossible. It's just that since you are an officer, you have to obey the orders from above. You reading www.youcanshu. Ordinary soldiers don't need to listen, but do officers like them dare not listen? At this moment, their battalion commander Zhang Lianjia's face sank like water. He no longer has a headache, but a pain in the egg. Why is it difficult to be a middle-level cadre? Naturally, it is because of pushing up and down. Orders from above must be carried out, and emotions from below must be taken care of. The soldiers who rushed over were all clamoring for guns, but he just yelled, "Don't I want to get guns," so the people below stopped. How can it be a long-term solution to just procrastinate like them? Suddenly, there were 2 gunshots of pop and pop not far away. The gunshot shocked everyone. New recruits like Shang Zhen are fine, but veterans can understand what kind of gun the bullets are shot with. But the gunshots were clearer than the gunshots of the rifles they used. It was the gunshots of the Japanese. After 2 gunshots, the officers and soldiers of the entire battalion became commotion again. This kind of situation is like a house that is on fire, but there is a bucket but it is not allowed to be used, but you have to spit to save it. Isn't this bullshit? When a person is in a hurry, he has quick wit. At this moment, Zhang Lianjia glanced meaningfully at Hu Baiao beside him, and then said, "I'll go and see what happened to the gunshot." Then he actually walked forward, and the soldiers naturally separated to watch their chief go. It's just that their battalion commander really went to check what was going on with the gunshot. Just when their battalion commander Zhang Lianjia disappeared into the shadow of a building with several of his men, Hu Baiao shouted loudly, "Break the lock on the warehouse." Third brother, Li Fushun, who was leading the gun, heard a familiar voice calling himself. It was undoubtedly Shang Zhen. When he turned around, he saw that Shang Zhen was already holding a rifle. "Hey!" Li Fushun asked in a daze, "Where did you get this gun?" "I picked it up on the ground when I ran out of the house," Shang Zhen replied. It turned out that Shang Zhen was holding a Japanese Type 38 rifle, that is, a 38 large cover. "What's the use of this gun? Have you got the bullets?" Li Fushun asked as a veteran. "Hey!" Shang Zhen was stunned. This is only the 2nd time he has touched a rifle. Shang Zhen was a soldier just the day before yesterday, and he really shot him at that time. It's just that he is a recruit, and no one can give him bullets if he can't shoot. It's just that before he figured out how to use the gun, his rifle was confiscated and put into storage. Because he was not familiar with it, Shang Zhen never thought of touching the bullet box from the fallen Japanese soldier. What's more, it was impossible for him to touch the bullet box from the Japanese army. Not to mention that the bullet box was strung on the belt of the Japanese army, the Japanese soldiers blocking their house were just knocked down by them with bricks, and they did not lose their combat effectiveness. I just think their guns are longer, and they can stab each other long enough. Shang Zhen argued in a low voice. Shang Zhen's defense made Li Fushun look at him in surprise, as if he didn't know his god-brother. Shang Zhen at this time has given him a new feeling. Previously, a platoon of them was blocked in the house by Japanese soldiers, and they didn't have any weapons to fight. If the Japanese soldiers rushed into the house, they would face the bayonets with their bare hands, and they would surely suffer heavy casualties. But how could Shang Zhen think of taking the Kong up and hitting the Japanese soldiers with bricks? The situation was critical at that time, so Li Fushun naturally had no time to praise Shang Zhen. But this time? Li Fushun is a veteran, he has seen Japanese soldiers, of course he knows that the 38th cover of the Japanese army is about 10 centimeters longer than the rifles used by the Northeast Army after the bayonet is installed. But Shang Zhen must have seen Japanese soldiers for the first time. How could he tell at a glance that the Japanese soldiers' rifles were longer than our Chinese's? It's useless if you don't have bullets, it's just a fire stick. Ho Wangshan, who had also finished receiving his weapon, squeezed over and said, "Let's just throw it here. If it can be used as a trophy in normal times, it's a lost battle now. What's the use of just having a gun from a Japanese soldier?" Li Fushun finally said. "Oh," Shang Zhen responded. He looked at the Japanese gun he picked up with regret. Poor Shang Zhen doesn't know even now that even if he picked up the 38th cover of the Japanese army, it can't be called picking up, but in military terms it is called capture. How can it not be used without bullets? In his heart, Shang Zhen did not agree with what Li Fushun and Ho Wangshan said. He vaguely felt that the rifles of the Japanese soldiers were longer than the rifles of the Chinese, so when the two sides stabbed each other with guns, the long guns would of course take advantage of it. Of course, even now Shang Zhen doesn't know that the two sides stabbing each other with guns is called bayonet fighting or hand-to-hand combat. He looked at this newly picked up rifle with regret. The rifle of the Japanese army is very new, even under the dim light of the armory now, the bayonet of the rifle still glows faintly. The bayonet was straight, in the shape of a knife, and the blood groove on it looked black. Shang Zhen instinctively felt that the steel mouth of this bayonet should be very good. But just when he was about to put the gun down, his heart suddenly moved, and his hand groped for the muzzle of the gun. After a while, when he touched a small button on the gun head, he found that the bayonet moved. Shang Zhen pressed the button with one hand and pulled out the bayonet with the other. Miraculously, he removed the bayonet. Shang Zhen's brain is not stupid. If he was stupid, how could he think of breaking down bricks when the Japanese army blocked the door? In this respect he owed his brains to his father's inheritance, for his father was a carpenter. Carpentry is a craft. In ancient times, traditional Chinese carpenters did not even have an iron nail, but they were able to combine furniture together, and it was durable. How could it be possible without ingenuity? Shang Zhen directly threw the rifle on the ground, took his newly assigned rifle in one hand, and ran out with the bayonet in the other. While running, he also looked at the bayonet in his hand. It is said to be a bayonet, but in Shang Zhen's eyes, it is no different from ordinary knives, and it also has a handle. There is a circular collar on the top of the handle, and a forward curved hook on the bottom of the handle, like the guard of a Chinese knife. Although he just fumbled to remove the bayonet from the gun just now, he also figured out how the bayonet was attached to the gun. The upper collar is put on the muzzle of the rifle, and there is a groove on the back of the knife handle that is stuck on the convex groove on the base of the rifle bayonet, and the button he fumbled to press is the small mechanism for how to remove the bayonet. Although Shang Zhen didn't learn half of the skills of his father, who had been a carpenter all his life, it didn't mean he wasn't interested in knives. A carpenter can live without nails, but he absolutely cannot live without iron tools such as axes, planes, hammers, and knives. Jin Kemu. It's just a pity that Shang Zhen threw away his first loot during his lifetime of fighting devils, leaving only a bayonet. But when the company commander Hu Biao assembled his team and was lecturing, others listened carefully, but Shang Zhen was already thinking. At this time, Shang Zhen was thinking about a very serious problem, that is, he suddenly found that he was not fainted. He retrieved all the Japanese rifles, and held the Chinese rifles in his hands. Although he didn't have that harmonious feeling of holding a rifle in his hand, he didn't feel fear either, instead he felt a sense of security. How could this feeling be dizzy? It seems that the direction I was thinking before falling asleep tonight was wrong, so what is it that I am afraid of? While Shang Zhen was thinking, Yu reading www.yuuganchu.com, he didn't notice their battalion commander Zhang Lianjia appeared. Zhang Lianjia didn't go to spy on the enemy because of the 2 gunshots, he just left with an excuse to give Hu Biao a chance to break open the warehouse lock. Because he was the battalion commander, he couldn't do whatever he wanted. He had to obey the orders from above. He didn't dare to convey the orders directly to the soldiers in the original words. He just ordered the guns to be put in the armory. The original words of the order he received were as follows: "Don't resist, don't move, put the gun in the warehouse, stand up to die, everyone will be benevolent, and sacrifice for the country." If he had learned the original words, the soldiers below would have to coax them to blow up the temple. "Grandma, what kind of order are these?" Zhang Lianjia is in his 40s this year, and he has been in the army for more than 20 years, but this is the first time he has received such an order: wait for death and not let him resist. He is the battalion commander, he has to consider the intentions above, but how do you ask him to convince the soldiers below? So his Xiaojuju got the gun first, and at this time he also received the order to break through. The emotional brigade commander didn't want to wait here to die. Zhang Lianjia had such a realization. "Let's go to Dongshanzhuizi." Zhang Lianjia gave the order to break through with a wave of his hand. Of course, Feng Tian not only has troops stationed in the Baidaing camp, but Dongshanzhuizi is where the Baidaing camp is located. Only then did Shang Zhen get out of his thoughts. He held his bayonet in one hand and his unused rifle in the other, and began to trot mechanically with the team. The first trophy that poor Shang Zhen got in his life was thrown away by him, and now there is only this half-loot, a Japanese-made 30 style bayonet. Under the night, there are continuous marching footsteps, and from time to time there will be the clashing sound of guns. The team didn't move fast, just because the night was too dark. Although tonight is a sleepless night for everyone, all the light that can be extinguished has been extinguished. The common people naturally heard the sound of cannons and gunshots. Bullets have no eyes, so who dares to raise fire in the dark? So when Zhang Lianjia's battalion passed through a residential area, all they could see was a lonely street light at the intersection ahead. The street lamp was emitting a dim yellow light, and there were moths and the like hovering around the street lamp. "Battalion commander, we won't just withdraw from Fengtian, will we?" At this time, Hu Biao, who was walking with Zhang Lianjia, asked in a low voice. "You ask me, who am I going to ask?" Zhang Lianjia was uninterested. There were 3 companies under Zhang Lianjia's battalion, but when he finally got his own battalion together, he found that their battalion was also short of 50 people. Whether it was stabbed to death by the Japanese army with a bayonet, or was stabbed, or disappeared in the dark. Their battalion lost about 50 people without firing a single shot, and the possibility of returning was basically zero. As the battalion commander, how could he be in a good mood? "I remember hearing that the regiment headquarters said that the Japanese army against us was only a brigade with 1,000 soldiers. Wouldn't we be able to beat 8,000 against 1,000? Hu Biao said again. He didn't look at his battalion commander Zhang Lianjia. The first night was too dark to see clearly, and the second was hard to see clearly. Because he was too familiar with Hu Biao, he also knew that Zhang Lianjia's thin face must be dark. The reason why Hu Biao asked was because he also felt useless. 1,000 Japanese soldiers beat them to 8,000, and then did they get the order to break through? As soon as the word breakthrough was mentioned, Hu Biao had the urge to scold his mother. What the is this breakthrough? 1,000 people encircling 8,000 people is like one person encircling 8 people. Is 8 people called breaking through? This is simply the biggest joke in the world. If you keep messing with me, I'll put you in confinement. Zhang Lianjia was not happy, and acted like a battalion commander. Zhang Lianjia and Hu Biao had a life-threatening friendship. During this Haifeng War last year, Zhang Lianjia certainly saved Hu Biao's life, but Hu Biao also carried Zhang Lianjia back from the battlefield. The relationship between the two of them can no longer be described as friendship. Because of this, Zhang Lianjia, who was in a bad mood, thought Hu Biao was annoying, and Hu Biao only maintained the image of the battalion commander in front of everyone. I would like to have a house closed and confine me. Hu Biao muttered in a low voice and stopped talking. Hu Biao's words stabbed Zhang Lianjia again. What does Hu Biao mean? Doesn't that mean that they are still breaking through and even lost their base camp, so how can they put him in confinement? Zhang Lianjia felt his teeth itching. He also wanted to scold someone, but he didn't know who to scold. But just as he squeezed the box cannon in his hand, the soldiers in front stopped. Because they are going out of this alley soon. Naturally, the barracks couldn't be in a prosperous place, and the place they were going to go now was just a slum area surrounded by squat houses. Battalion commander, company commander, what should we do? The person standing at the front turned around and asked. What should I do? Hu Biao asked back, because the person who spoke in front was old Mao Wang. Battalion commander Zhang Lianjia walked with their company. Of course, they couldn't let the battalion commander walk in the front. Didn't you mean to break through? Old Mao Wang asked hurriedly. That's right, since the order was to break out, there were street lights ahead. If you walked over, you would be exposed to the light. What if there were Japanese soldiers with machine guns in front of you? Bertzi? How many Japanese are there? Hu Biao finally vented his pent-up anger. Old Mao Wang has nothing to do with his company commander. In the army, there is no such thing as ant talk. As a subordinate, ask the superior for instructions on how to act next. Instead of giving a clear opinion, the superior even complained, but what should I do? That needs to be stated clearly. The first two go to investigate. Zhang Lianjia said at this time. The battalion commander spoke, and the company commander naturally remained silent again. The two soldiers in the front bowed their guns and walked out. Only the two of them took 2 steps, and old Mao Wang scolded in a low voice, "Do you understand that one front and one back cover each other? Whoever's soldier is distressed." The company commander, Hu Biao, was complaining, but Mr. Wang couldn't help thinking about it. What if there were really Japanese soldiers in the dark alley opposite? The vanguard is undoubtedly the most dangerous, and old Mao Wang is really scared. If there are Japanese soldiers on the opposite side, one of his own people will be killed in battle. So far, their platoon has only killed the soldier who snatched the Japanese gun. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com. A soldier walked forward with a gun in his hand, and everyone's eyes were on the soldier's back. Those who can be the vanguard are naturally veterans. At this time, the soldier glanced back, he hesitated for a moment, and when he turned his head again, he finally pulled the bolt. The officers behind him naturally saw the soldier's actions. Although there was an order not to shoot, no one stopped him from loading the bullets. Since it was said that it was a breakout, and he was still walking towards the light source in the dark, such a vanguard has become the target of public criticism, and he must be prepared to die at any time. It is easy to die generously, but to die calmly. Facing the fear of the unknown is even more psychologically stressful than charging in the face of enemy machine gun fire. At this time, the soldier started to trot with his gun in his hand. He needed to rush through the section illuminated by the street light at the fastest speed to the opposite alley, hiding himself in the darkness. How wide can a road be? Under the sprint of the soldier, he quickly ran under the street lamp. So his back became clear in the eyes of everyone behind him. But at this moment, there was a pop gunshot. The people behind saw a red line passing through the soldier's head at a speed barely visible to the naked eye, and then the soldier fell under the street lamp. There was a clang, the sound of his rifle falling to the ground. And in the instant of the gunshot, the alley where Zhang Lianjia was hiding was already filled with the sound of crackling pulling the bolt of the gun. There is really a Japanese army on the opposite side. Everyone gasped. Silence is often scary. A lone lamp was dimly shining at the street corner. And under the dim light, the soldier of the Northeast Army who was bending forward just now was lying on the ground motionless. There was no struggle and convulsions before dying, because he was shot to death just now, and the seemingly faint red line was the trajectory of the bullet flying in the night. Fear began to spread among the soldiers of the Northeast Army, and even Battalion Commander Zhang Lianjia heard the sound of soldiers' teeth colliding not far away. No need to ask, it was scary. Do you have soldiers who are so afraid of death? At this moment Jet Zhang no longer had the mind to think about this problem, he had to reverse his morale. So he reached out and lightly touched Hu Biao beside him and began to whisper. After a while, an order was passed from front to back. When the order was delivered, there was another crack gunshot in this quiet and somewhat frightening alley. In the sound of this gunshot, the dim yellow street lamp like a will-o'-the-wisp went out, and the world became completely dark, except for a faint red light in the northwest sky. Set fire to a house. This shot was fired by Zhang Lianjia. Zhang Lianjia himself did not dare to openly disobey the order, but he did not want his own people to be slaughtered here by the Japanese army. He analyzed it just now, and there shouldn't be many Japanese troops on the opposite side, otherwise they wouldn't just fire one shot, and their machine guns would blare. There were low-pitched orders passed in the alleys, and footsteps came out in the darkness, and soon the footsteps filled the middle of this squat residential area. Since it is a residential area, there are naturally people in the house. At this time, except for the 3-year-old child, the adults had already been awakened by the gunfire. Some people came out of the house in their clothes to watch the movement in the courtyard, but when they heard the rustling footsteps outside the courtyard, they ran back to the house and closed the door in fright. Tonight is bound to be an unusual night. During the period when Zhang's father and son ruled the 3 northeastern provinces, we can't say how well the common people lived, but they were still passable. They didn't know that since tonight, for 14 years, this place has become a paradise for wolves. Rush over! Zhang Lianjia's shout suddenly sounded in the darkness. At this very moment, in that squat residential area, there was the sound of plopping footsteps that could not be heard. Hundreds of officers and soldiers of the Northeast Army came from different alleys with guns under the cover of night. Just rush to the opposite side. And this is exactly the way Zhang Lianjia came up with to break through. Even though Zhang Lianjia wanted to fight the Japanese army again, he also knew that there were nearly 8,000 people in their brigade in the entire Baidang. Under the strict order from above, 8,000 people dare not fight 1,000 Japanese soldiers, so why should he use hundreds of his own soldiers to fight 1,000 Japanese soldiers? Since they are not allowed to shoot but are allowed to break through, then let's rush out in the dark like this. He, Zhang Lianjia, still doesn't believe it. Could it be that the Japanese army will take the risk of accidentally injuring their own people and fight bayonets with their own battalion in the dark? The night can give people both fear and courage. As far as ordinary soldiers are concerned, whether it is out of courage or fear, at least for now they want to save their lives, and they can only rush forward to the designated place to mix. So even though no one yelled, the sound of running that made the people in the house tremble could still give people a huge shock. Among the running crowd, Shang Zhen was like a small boat, he was urged to run forward by the sound of footsteps behind him. The reason for such a situation was firstly because Shang Zhen was a recruit who couldn't even shoot a gun, and secondly because he was distracted when the order was issued from above. At that time, Shang Zhen suddenly understood why he was dizzy. I don't feel dizzy from guns or blood. What can make me dizzy is when someone dies after being shot. When he saw that Vanguard died not far in front of him, Several people in ancient costumes died in front of him again in his mind. He seemed to see the blood crawling down from the soldier's head like an earthworm, and he seemed to see those people in ancient costumes also dying in front of his eyes, and he felt a tingling feeling in his heart. Fear. So he started to tremble, and he was so nervous that he went up and down his teeth, although he didn't know that the sound of his teeth colliding had been heard by his battalion commander Zhang Lianjia. But no matter how nervous Shang Zhen was, it was useless, his fate was not in his own hands. Their battalion commander Zhang Lianjia is with them, Yu reading www.yuyu. And the platoon he was in was at the forefront of their company. When Zhang Lianjia's order to rush out came out, the sound of intensive footsteps from front, back, left and right engulfed him and rushed forward mechanically. This time I am also the vanguard, so will I die? Shang Zhen was thinking nervously, and then he felt that he tripped and fell to the ground. Oh, no, will I be trampled to death by the people behind? The moment he fell down, Shang Zhen instinctively rolled to the side. His desire to survive was so strong that he didn't even know how quick and agile he was when he rolled to the side. And just as Shang Zhen got up, the people behind Thump took his place and rushed forward. Of course Shang Zhen also wanted to run along with him, but at this moment he felt his knee hurt, so he stopped running. Only then did he realize that when he fell just now, his knee didn't know what hit him. The impact was so hard that he felt that his knee could no longer bend back. In order to avoid being hit by people behind, he could only limp and run sideways forward, and at this time he had not forgotten to lean on the ground with the rifle in his right hand. Thus, such a situation appeared. Others rushed forward in a straight line, but Shang Zhen ran out diagonally. There were low buildings everywhere, and when Shang Zhen rushed to the opposite side, he went straight into another small alley. But at the moment when he ran into the black hole, he felt a force coming from him, and he felt that the rifle he was holding in his right hand was blown away with a shock. At this moment, the only thought in Shang Zhen's mind was, I was plotted against by the Japanese. The crisis of survival can make people burst into great potential. The moment Shang Zhen squatted down, he stretched out his hand and pulled something from his waist, and stabbed forward. It was the bayonet that captured him. And almost at the same time, there was a sound of wind blowing over his head. It was the of a Japanese Type 38 rifle smashed over. Everything happened so fast. Shang Zhen felt the bayonet in his hand encounter resistance after stabbing. That should be the feeling when the bayonet stabbed the human skeleton. Shang Zhen was nicknamed Ma Ganner by the people in the same row, so how much strength can he have? And just as he felt that the bayonet was blocked, someone screamed. At this time, how can Shang Zhen control whether the opponent is a Japanese soldier or one of his own? Just hearing the scream of "Ah!" he couldn't tell the difference at all. He only knew that if he didn't kill the other party would kill him. He drew back the bayonet and stabbed forward forcefully, following the cry. But this time he heard a poof, that was the sound of a bayonet piercing the flesh. After getting the knife, Shang Zhen dodged to the side, leaned against the corner of the wall, and squatted down again. It can be seen that he just squatted down, and then heard a dang sound from his head. It was still the sound of the gun hitting the wall. It's not right to squat here, Shang Zhen realized it instantly. I rushed in from the outside, and if the Japanese army wanted to kill me, of course they would greet me where I made my voice. Realizing this, Shang Zhen carefully squatted and moved forward step by step. The officers and soldiers of the Northeast Army were still retreating, and the man who was stabbed by Shang Zhen with a bayonet was still moaning. The chaotic voice finally covered Shang Zhen's heavy breathing. Shang Zhen felt sweat dripping from his temples. One was because of nervousness, and the other was because his physical strength was not good. But Shang Zhen remained vigilant, just because he knew that there must be other Japanese soldiers in the darkness. Now he can be sure that the one he stabbed with a bayonet was the Japanese army. Because the person he stabbed was groaning within close proximity of him, and he could now be sure that the sound was absolutely different from what the Chinese made. His body is so weak, Shang Zhen sighed in his heart, but immediately he felt something was wrong. Because he still heard the sound of footsteps going away, they were all officers and soldiers from their battalion, they should have heard the screams of the Japanese army just now, but no one came to check. Shang Zhen suddenly realized that it was dark now, so what if he was his partner? He couldn't tell the enemy from himself, so who could help him? If you want to survive, you must rely on yourself, but you can't make a sound yet. The sound of his companion's footsteps was receding, but at the same time, Shang Zhen heard voices coming from all around him. There is no doubt that it is not the rats that make these sounds, but the Japanese army. It is impossible for the Japanese army to have only 1 or 2 Japanese soldiers here, but there will never be too many. If the Japanese army was just 1 man, Shang Zhen couldn't explain the sound of the gun smashing on the wall and the sound of the front and rear. But if there were many Japanese troops, it would be impossible for them to let so many people in their battalion leave easily. Now Shang Zhen still doesn't know how to shoot a gun, but he knows that there is a kind of gun in the army called a machine gun. Veterans said that kind of gun is old and powerful. After shooting, the bullets burst into strings, chug-chug sounded, and a shuttle of bullets can knock down a dozen people. If the Japanese army had this kind of machine gun, if they fired the machine gun like that, then their battalion would never have killed only the vanguard. Shang Zhen already regretted it a bit, he really shouldn't have burrowed into this alley again, making himself an enemy at both front and back, and he couldn't advance or retreat. The sound of Xisuo in front of and behind him became louder, and as the sound became louder, Shang Zhen felt his heart beating faster. He felt that the hand holding the bayonet had also become stiff. But he didn't know it, but his hands were trembling slightly because of nervousness and fear. At this moment, the sound of my companion's leaving footsteps had disappeared, but the sizzle sound became louder, followed by a rustling sound, which was made by the hard sole of the shoe stepping on the ground. At this moment, Shang Zhen felt terrified in his heart. But his hearing is so clear, he can even judge that the rustling footsteps right in front of him can step on his head if he walks a few steps forward. He wants to move, but he can't move. I can't wait to die here. A voice shouted deep in Shang Zhen's heart. But then, there happened to be another voice shouting that I was afraid. The two voices were intertwined and confronted like this, like two villains tearing at the depths of Shang Zhen's heart. One was pulling him into the abyss, the other was still trying to pull him into the abyss, and the difference was only in how to die. This kind of conflict was so intense, and the rustling footsteps just in front of him stopped, and when a person stepped towards him in the darkness, Shang Zhen suddenly exploded, and he clasped his hands together, holding the bayonet in both hands at the same time the handle of the knife stabbed out again. With a poof, Shang Zhen felt exactly the touch of his bayonet moving forward in the enemy's flesh, and then his hand hit the curved hook in front of the handle that was similar to a gauntlet. This time, he actually pierced the Japanese army in front of him. Shang Zhen froze for a moment. Did I kill someone? This idea flashed in his mind, but then he pulled out the knife and slammed forward. The Japanese soldier stabbed by him had already fallen, and Shang Zhen felt that his foot was on the opponent's head. He staggered and nearly fell down, but instinctively started running again. At the same time he changed to holding the knife with one hand and stabbed forward indiscriminately. Under extreme depression, Yu reading www.yuuganshu.com either died in depression, or broke out in depression. At this moment Shang Zhen finally broke out. At this moment, he couldn't control so much anymore, his skinny body directly ran out of the momentum that I'm still going despite the thousands of troops ahead. Shang Zhen heard the shouts of the Japanese soldiers in front of him and behind him, it was the Japanese soldiers saying here. But Shang Zhen still didn't care. When he stabbed a Japanese soldier in front of him again with the bayonet in his hand, he finally rushed out of the alley and disappeared into the darkness. After a while, when the Japanese soldiers behind him were in chaos, Shang Zhen had already leaned his body against a low wall. He was panting heavily. With his current sluggish body, the speed at which he could sprint for 100 meters to get out of the enemy group had reached the limit of his body. But Shang Zhen knew that his danger had not been completely relieved, and he would eventually need to find the main force. When his breath calmed down a bit, Shang Zhen supported the wall to stand up, dragged his sore legs and walked slowly towards the east. Shang Zhen didn't know, not even the entire Northeast Army in the Fengtian North Camp on the night of September 18. During this time node known as the September 18 incident, the Northeast Army suffered more than 300 casualties, and the Japanese Army suffered 24 casualties. Among the 24 casualties of the Japanese Army, only 2 were dead, and the rest were all injured. The September 18 incident represented the beginning of China's War of Resistance. Later generations called the battle when the Northeast Army rushed out of the North Camp in Shenyang as the Breakout Battle of the North Camp. But is this really a breakout battle? Shang Zhen, a soldier who had only been in the army for 3 days, killed 2 Japanese soldiers because of his own survival needs, and finally saved a little face for the Northeast Army. I said, "Third brother, don't wait." Someone whispered in the darkness. "Wait a little longer, wait a little longer." Someone replied, it was Li Fushun. Their battalion finally managed to break out from the Baidang camp. In fact, none of them knew how many Japanese soldiers surrounded them. But what about how many people? They were ordered not to resist, and to sacrifices to serve the country. Even their battalion commander Zhang Lianja fired a shot, but he just knocked out the street lamp. Then people from 1 battalion and 3 companies of them rushed forward in the dark. In the process of rushing out, of course they heard the shouts of the Japanese army, but there was no gunfire. After the 3 companies met at the agreed place, everyone woke up. There must not be many Japanese soldiers who surrounded and intercepted them. This was something during the battle, but at this moment Li Fushun realized that Shang Zhen was missing. Shang Zhen was brought out of the house by him, so of course he should be responsible, otherwise, if something happens to Shang Zhen, how will he see his wife again in the future? Li Fushun asked the people in their platoon one by one, "Have you seen Shang Zhen?" At this time, someone asked him, "Who is Shang Zhen?" Li Fushun had no choice but to say, "Shang Zhen is a stick." It's just that no one told him where Shang Zhen was. Before breaking through, Li Fushun took Shang Zhen with him all the time, and he also specifically asked Shang Zhen to stay with him and not get lost. But how could Li Fushun take care of Shang Zhen in this dark night? He couldn't tie himself and Shang Zhen together with a rope. Seeing that Shang Zhen did not come back, Li Fushun thought that Shang Zhen must have fallen behind. Although the possibility of Shang Zhen being in danger is not ruled out, Li Fushun still has a sense of luck, hoping that Shang Zhen is just left behind and can find him in the dark. In desperation, Li Fu greeted Wang Lao Mao, the platoon leader, and took a second horse who was usually close to him, and stayed on the way halfway to wait for Shang Zhen's return. I said, "Third brother. Your surname is Li and his surname is Shang. Why are you 2 brothers?" At this moment, the soldier named Mao Huzi asked him. "I have no father or mother. I grew up with Shang Zhen's parents." Li Fushun explained. "Oh." Mao Huzi nodded and then sighed, "The debt of favor is the hardest to repay." "What debt of favor?" "They are brothers." Li Fushun corrected Mao Huzi's statement. Mao Huzi obviously agreed with Li Fushun's statement and stopped talking. Li Fushun began to whisper about his childhood. Li Fushun was 6 years old when he had no parents, and he was already sensible. At that time, he remembered that he was the 3rd child in his family, and that's how others called him the 3rd brother. But his parents are gone, so he has to live with his eldest brother and 2nd brother, but the elder sister-in-law and 2nd sister-in-law are not fuel-efficient lamps. He has a stubborn temper. Once he was beaten by his elder sister-in-law and scolded by his 2nd sister-in-law. When he got angry, he ran away from home. In the end, cold and hungry, he passed out at the door of Shang Zhen's house. He was rescued by Shang Zhen's mother with rice soup, and he has lived in Shang Zhen's house ever since. At that time, Shang Zhen's father was in good health and was a carpenter, so he could live on. Li Fushan was very stubborn when he was a child, and Shang Zhen's parents were all good-tempered, and they were never willing to beat him. In the end, he also slowly recognized that he is a member of this family. Having said this, Li Fushan stopped talking, but he recalled a scene in his mind. That was when Shang Zhen was still young, and he still had to eat zhaor every day. Northeast people call a child who is breastfed as eating zhaor. Once, Li Fushan stared blankly at Shang Zhen lying in his mother's arms eating pricks. This is the case nowadays, and there are some children who are not taboo, quit milk until they are 7 or 8 years old. At this time, Shang Zhen's mother saw the envious look in his eyes. At that time, Shang Zhenniang smiled at him and asked him, "Do you want to eat zhaor too?" Li Fushan knew that his face turned red at that time. He also forgot that he nodded or shook his head at that time, or that he didn't need to nod or shake his head at all. The look in his eyes was the answer. Then Shang Zhen's mother said, "If you call me mother, I will let you eat zhaor." Li Fushan remembered what happened next. After all, he didn't have the nerve to eat Shang Zhen's mother's bark, so he ran away blushing. But since that day, Li Fushan changed the name of Shang Zhen's mother to Mother. Third brother, Yan. Mao Hughes's voice interrupted Li Fushan's memory. A slender flame ignited in the dark night. It was the light of the match, that is, the match, and then white smoke diffused in the dark night. Third brother, let's wait here. Can he wait? Will he come here? This black light is blind, he won't get lost, right? After puffing out 2 puffs of cigarettes, you read www.yuyugonshu.com. Mao Hughes asked again. I can't get lost, my house, that is, his house is right in front of me. Li Fushan explained again. So far, the two of them stopped talking and just smoked cigarettes. Just when the two of them smoked the third cigarette, the eastern sky was already slightly brightened. Li Fushan didn't say to leave, so Mao Hughes naturally accompanied him. But at this moment, they really heard footsteps coming from the west. Who? Li Fushan said in a low voice, and at the same time pulled the bolt of the gun. Now is the time of war, the use of guns is a must. It's just that Yu Fushan and Mao Hughes waited for a while and then there was no movement. Third brother, didn't you hear wrong? Mao Hu's opponent asked. No mistake, Shang Zhen must be back. Li Fushan said with certainty, and then he yelled loudly, Xiao'er, I'm your third brother. It's strange to say that just after Li Fushan finished shouting, Shang Zhen's echo came from the front, Third brother, I'm secondary, I'm back. Listening to Shang Zhen's voice, there was a certain kind of thrill, which was conceivable in the eyes of Li Fushan and Mao Hughes, and Shang Zhen's timid appearance would definitely be trembling if he could overtake it. Third brother, how do you know it's your younger brother who's back? Ma Sihuzi asked curiously. He's timid, he hides as soon as there is any movement. Li Fushan said angrily and funny. At this moment, he finally breathed a sigh of relief, and the worries he had worried for most of the night finally disappeared. Footsteps sounded, and Shang Zhen really ran over. However, to the surprise of Li Huqin and Mao Hughes, when Shang Zhen ran up to them, the first thing he said was, Third brother, I'm hungry, do you have anything to eat?